Call that art?
What's this white stuff next to me all about?
It's crap. This is crap.
Yeah, who did this?
Some
Are you
tosser.
responsible for this?
Some tosser did it.
Are you responsible for this?
I am responsible for it.
Are you?
Also a sense of humour though, white trash.
White trash, yeah. It was,
that could mean something else, of
it
course.
could, particularly in Australian terms. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I collaborated with a friend on that who wrote a poem to go with it, and the poem came up on an old computer screen that was embedded in the trash with the soundtrack of rats scratching. Sort of, there was a smoke machine that we got to periodically sort of fill with
Have you felt an urge to do more of that sort of conceptual work?
No. it probably got it out of my system. I mean, if it was appropriate, then maybe I'd think about it. But I did have a wild idea of transporting this pile of
White trash.
and photographing it in different locations around Australia. But it proved to be incredibly difficult at the time. We started, we were going to put it on the beach in South Melbourne, but the council objected and wouldn't give us permits and all sorts of things. And I thought, this is going to take far too much of my time to try and get this off the ground, so I didn't pursue it. You know, there are obviously opportunities like that, and if something came up, I would certainly take it.
In terms of white trash, if you look at perhaps other themes, have you spent much time admiring or looking at Indigenous people's art, and has that influenced you at all?
No. I try not to look at that, because fundamentally what I'm doing is the same as Aboriginal painters. They're maps,
Right.
basically, and I really don't want the Aboriginal mapping to influence what I'm doing. So,
Dreamtime.
yeah, I'm just trying to keep it at arm's length. I don't really want to get too involved with the marks that they make to communicate the positions on the maps and what the story is. So I've deliberately steered clear of.
So aware of it, but saying,
Yeah,
look, it's not my culture, it's not it's
It's
not
not-
a sense of sort of wanting to appropriate anything of that.
Yeah.
Because good artists, what was Picasso's famous words? Good artists borrow, great artists steal. What do you steal or borrow?
I think I steal and borrow from a lot of people, a lot of great, particularly great Australian artists, and as you and I have discussed before, one of my great heroes is Fred Williams. Just love his work. And back in the 80s, I was fortunate enough to be able to go on a painting trip with Clifton Pugh before he died suddenly. And that was a fantastic opportunity. I remember the night before I was panicking because I thought, oh my God, we're going to be painting with Cliff. Panic stations.
Right.
But he was fantastic and encouraged me, and I got right into painting. We were up in the Kimberley for 3 weeks, out of communication basically with civilization. But we did have to, every couple of days, radio into the flying doctor service to say that we're still alive, which was quite fun.
No need to come and pick us up
No,
yet.
no, we're doing all right.
That must have been quite an experience.
It was. And
Were you painting in oils or?
No, I was painting in gouache. We took a life model with us, so the trip was called Life in the Landscape. And 10 years ago, I went back to the Kimberley with a group of friends, and again for 3 weeks in Canada.
How different do you find the work that you do in the studio versus en plein air on these sorts of trips? I mean, do you find it takes a bit more to get motivated when you come in and you see that a blank canvas and you've got to start making marks, whereas when you're in nature, you've got stimuli that's around you all the time. How do you sort of see your working?
I think because I'm painting from memory, it's not an issue. So
Okay.
I'm not sort of, I don't have to look at what I'm painting because it's all coming from my mind. It's got to flow out. When I'm painting plein air, it's there in front of me. And I think that the work, I normally work on paper, it's a lot quicker. I just get into it.
But you're not a slow painter.
No, I'm not.
I mean, you've been here for less than 2 weeks,
I
and you've
can't-
already
I
got
can't.
14 canvases of
That's
some
right.
size. Yeah.
But I can't paint slow. It's just not in my nature. I just have to get into it.
When you look at a canvas, so you approached this canvas when it was a blank canvas, how much of that image was already in your mind versus has evolved as you've got into the painting process and you've responded to things that you...
Yeah, I think probably maybe 50% is
You've got the basic shape, the structure.
the shapes and
yeah.
the thing, and then the rest of it evolves, and then I stand back and then I respond to the painting rather than any reference I might be using that is left behind and the painting takes over. So there are marks in the painting that don't really exist, but it communicates maybe the movement of traffic or the lights, the movement of boats, aircraft, all sorts of things that...
In the painting behind you, for example, the harbour itself, you've allowed the thinner
texture,
to give texture and form to, in that sense that this is liquid.
That's right. Yeah.
So was that a happy accident, or was that
No,
something
it was,
that you...
it was deliberate. I do it a lot in the Melbourne paintings where the bay features, and I layer it up. So there might be 6 or 7 different layers of colour using that sort of technique, and I often rub them back up as well, then relayer again.
That process of pushing and pulling, I noticed with a number of the paintings in the studio, you've revisited them several days later as they've perhaps got a bit drier, and you've sort of either removed parts or added parts to it. I mean, how often will you rework a canvas versus a canvas that you step back after the first sitting and say that's finished?
As often as it needs to be reworked, until I'm sort of convinced in my own mind that it is finished. Sometimes
Well, there were wonderful stories of Bonnard going into galleries and with his paintbrush and trying to finish a painting that had been sold earlier, years
changed
ago.
this one. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, you're not quite as bad
No,
as that.
I don't do that.
No.
But there is one painting that I sold and I forgot to sign. The client keeps calling me and saying, when you come around and sign the painting, please. And it's been maybe 5 years. So I have to
Go back and sign it.
and sign it. But I tend to actually put a signature on the back of the canvases. I don't
So it doesn't
like-
actually interfere with
I don't
the
like
face of it.
my name on the front of the...
It's sort of branding exercise in a way. You've probably had enough of branding.
I've had enough of that. And I think that the style and the technique sort of speaks for itself and it says it's me. So yeah, I tend to sign them on the back, but I would say some of the clients insist that I put a signature on the front. So
Yes.
I hide it somewhere.
Hong Kong's a city of people, lots of people.
Yeah.
Quite a few of the artists that have come up have made reference to that. And yet, if I look at many of your paintings, you don't find any people. What happened to the people? It's just the evidence of the people.
I think because I'm so far away from the people, in terms of scale, they don't sort of exist. They exist in terms of the traffic and the movement in the city, but there's so many sort of wide vistas don't get into.
And yet you will sometimes get very interested in figurative work. I was looking last night at, again, your website, and you had a whole series of animals.
That's right. Yes, that was a fun sort of exercise. And again, it was a collaboration with a friend, Brian Cooper, who wrote the poems after I painted the images. He then wrote the poems to go with them.
Again, bringing a bit of the conceptual humour into the art as well. You mentioned Fred Williams. He didn't paint that many cityscapes. Although I was very excited the other day when you showed me a drawing of Hanging Rock. And, very similar to a painting
That's right.
I know of his. But who else in the Australian scene has influenced you, do you feel?
I don't really know.
What about the international scene?
Yeah, international. I mean,
You just mentioned Hockney.
Hockney. I love his draftsmanship, his ability to draw and then destroy that drawing. And you know, people look at it and say, well, you know, anybody could do that. So, but you know, but he didn't. You know, it's, and I think I sort of work the same way, that I can sit down and I could do a conventional sort of drawing. So I have that skill and that knowledge, but it's not part of what I'm doing now.
He did a series the other day, for example, using his iPad. He was one of the first I know to take advantage of the new technology to put together a series. Is that something that you could see yourself doing?
Oh, look, I do it all the time. I draw directly into the iPad. John Olsen, love his work. And again, it's that sort of breaking down the traditional drawing skills and creating a style. It's lovely. Frank Auerbach in the UK. But what fascinates me, his works look as though they've been painted in about 20 minutes, and he spends months and months and months working on them. To the extent some of his drawings, he rubs them away so much that it creates a hole in the paper. So he needs to back it up and start again. So if you look at some of his drawings, there's sort of holes that where he's still working away and trying to...
You've done both work on canvas and board this trip.
That's right.
The canvas obviously a little bit more delicate and you're not able to rub it back quite as much. How do you sort of weigh whether or not you're going to use a canvas or a board then? If that's part of your process.
I'll mix it up. Some of the work on the website is done on board. I think it gives you an opportunity to sort of create a slightly different texture with the paint. One of the things that I really enjoy doing is to sort of free myself up mentally, is that I put a blindfold on and I draw a self-portrait just with what I can feel with my left hand. And you end up with drawings that you would never create any other way. So it's quite fascinating. And I refer to those as facial maps, basically. Again, it's that mapping the contours and the lines and the shapes that appear out of nowhere.
Whereas your studio is actually in the Gasworks, as you mentioned, which also has other artists. How important, in your mind, is having other artists around?
Yeah, it's very important. I think there is that interaction between us, and they can come in and say, "What the hell are you doing?
Right.
You know, you've lost the plot." Maybe I have. So, focus you back on reality. The nice thing is that there's a mixture. There's 5 painters. There are 4 ceramic artists and 5 sculptors. So there are those different disciplines. And over the years, I've done a little bit of work. I did an exhibition, as we mentioned before, which was called Poetic Fauna. I actually created some porcelain cups and engraved the images onto the cups. So I've sort of been able to sort of mix some of the things. And earlier this year there was a another group exhibition that was outside in the park, where I created porcelain sculptures of dingoes that actually sat up in the tree. So they were up in the branches of the tree, and it was called Barking Up the Wronged Tree. Which again is along with that went a sort of spoof artist critique of the work that was on the little plaque.
So humour, I mean, this is a recurring theme in a lot of your work. Humour is actually important.
I think so.
Okay.
I think a lot of artists take themselves far too seriously.
Right.
Then my pet hate is these artist statements that you read and go, what the hell is that? It's like, stop this. I just think if you're a painter, the paintings speak for themselves. You shouldn't have to spend 2 pages explaining what you've done and why you've done it. So I get very frustrated with people that spend so much time. I think they go on a course to do art speak. It's encouraging.
A lot of the art schools today seem to be as much about the conceptual and talking about the art as it is about making the art.
Yeah, and that I just think is sort of missing the point.
Did you ever want to teach yourself?
I do occasionally. I'll go in and take them through a case study or show them how to introduce layouts very quickly, sort of tricks of the trade that they don't have these days because everybody's sitting in front of a computer. Frustrates me. When I was creative director in Taipei, I had guys working for weeks on end creating things on the computer that ultimately had no idea and never even get up and run. So I decided one morning, I got up particularly early. I used to go into the office early anyway to beat the traffic because it was just a nightmare. But I think I got into the office at 5 o'clock one evening and I just took all the cables out of the computers from the creative department and locked them in my office, which was pandemonium when everybody got in. There's nothing to work. And I said, you don't get the cable back until you've shown me an idea that I've approved.
Wow.
I said, I don't want you wasting time, weeks on end producing something on a computer that has no value.
Right.
So they slowly learned and it worked really well. They could work a lot faster, get a lot more done. And it was a really good exercise, but it wasn't planned. It came out of frustration. Just like
If you were advising someone today in terms of the art world and whether or not a career as an artist is a good idea, what would you say to a young person today?
Well, I think it's a good idea. I couldn't survive without painting or being involved some way creatively. And I think the best example of my advice was to my own daughter who studied photography in Melbourne, or was studying photography in Melbourne, and came to London when I was posted back to the London office for a holiday. And we were having dinner with some friends. David Smith, who was a film director, said to Catherine over dinner, what do you want to do when you leave university? So she said, I want to get into television production. So he said, well, Kath, I'll give you a job tomorrow. We sent her into a total spin, and after dinner I said, Dad, what do I do? And I said, Kath, you could go back to Melbourne, finish your course, get a piece of paper that says you finished your course, and you will never ever get another opportunity to work in a London-based production company. So I said, you work it out for yourself.
And she
never
did.
Went back.
Never
Never went back, and,
Right.
and now works for an agency in London, they've won so many awards for their work that, sort of, she's never looked back.
Ted, thank you very much for spending this afternoon talking to me. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you up here at Hong Kong. And congratulations on the terrific body of work that you've managed to create in the short period that you were here. I loved having you, Jill. I've enjoyed your war stories, and in particular, I've really enjoyed watching your work. It's been terrific.
Thank you very much.